Welcome back, everybody, to episode 6 of Isokinetics 101. I would like to invite John on as well to join us. John, how's it going?
Good, Daniel. How are you, bud?
I'm well. We are moved into our new home in Atlanta and getting settled in.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Beautiful Atlanta. There's a lot of good things about Atlanta. You should
Oh,
enjoy
yeah.
it.
Oh, we are. We've already checked out a few of the local restaurants and food menus. So it's an exciting
Beautiful.
time.
It is.
So good. Well, tonight we're going to talk about isotonic training for not just strengthening like we traditionally would with isotonics, but neuromuscular control and proprioception training.
And that sounds great. So first, let me just kind of welcome all of our international guests again. It's always great that we have people coming from Europe. We have people coming from Asia. We have a lot of different people on board with us tonight. Just want to kind of let you know we've got some questions. Where are you guys going to be anywhere in the next month or two? I'll be doing a couple of programs at Rehab Summit in Vegas in the middle of July, and then at the last weekend in July, I'll be at Clearwater Beach for the Orthopedic for Primary Care and Rehabilitation Therapist. That's a 3-day course that's happening in Clearwater. It's a sand pearl. So if you have an opportunity and you're at any of those meetings, by all means, make sure that you grab me and talk so we can have a conversation.
Fantastic. All right, John, let's go ahead and knock out our webcams and we'll get started.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. So, as before, follow us on Facebook. Check out CSMI's Facebook page. I'm also on Facebook with my name and then my credentials. If you have questions, please email them to Rob. The last few episodes, we've went a little long. We haven't had a chance to get into answering some of the questions, but we're going to remedy that and get into some questions at the end of today. And I actually had a user email Rob today, and we kind of worked on uh, what he can use the machine for as far as with one of his patients. So definitely send those in to Rob. That way we can communicate back and forth. Another thing about CSMI, they also have a couple other websites that they've built recently. One is cybextest.org. It's a free database for registering your clinic for isokinetic testing. That way, patients and physicians who have need of isokinetic testing, they can log on to cybextest.org and they can find you and your clinic right there through that. So it only takes a couple minutes to sign up for, and it's free. So definitely do that. You can also catch up and review previous episodes at isokinetics101.org. And you can always go to csmisolutions.com. That's CSMI's main webpage for all of their additional products that they have available. All right, I want to give a couple shout outs. First, again, Eric Mara and JW Matheson at PT Inquest. I can't say just how good of a job they do at uh, their weekly podcast, which is basically an online journal club. It's definitely getting hard in today's world to sit through and read evidence. So it's good to have these resources out there. Also, the intro music that was provided to us by bensound.com. But then I have a special shout out today, and that's to a therapist that worked with us at Proactive. That's Dwayne Heiner. Now, he taught me a lot about what you're going to see today with the isotonics. He kind of dove in deep with this mode of exercise and training. So I want to give a shout out to him because a lot of what you're going to see today, he kind of really helped build that out in the past. So thank you again, Dwayne. All right, when we look at the roadmap of our webinar series, you can see that we started with the history and science of isokinetics in episode 1, followed by a preview of the program in episode 2. Episodes 3 through 6 cover the training applications on the dynamometer, including mobility, stability, strength, and today's session covering neuromuscular control through isotonic exercise. Now, episodes 7 and 8, that'll discuss isometric and isokinetic testing protocols, followed by episodes 9 and 10 with our case studies, first on lower extremity, then upper, with details on how to include the dynamometer throughout the plan of care. Finally, we're going to end the year with a wrap up and review, and we're working on getting a guest episode thrown in there as well. Now, again, today we're discussing control training. Now, unlike mobility, stability, and strength phases of the rehab, control training doesn't occur as a progressive stepwise progression through the plan of care, meaning that we actually use it throughout the entire plan of care, depending on what application you're using. Now, when we talk about the science of isotonics, there's a few things to remember. The speed is variable and the resistance is constant throughout the range of motion. But here's something to think about. Remember last month when John discussed how a muscle's torque signature is not constant throughout the range of motion? For example, he talked about the quadriceps and how it's strongest in mid-range, about 60 to 70 degrees, but it's the weakest at end ranges. So from the muscle's perspective, if I load up a constant or isotonic resistance, which is the graph on the left here, as I move from my weak point to my strong point and then back to the weak point, the resistance starts high, gets lighter, and then gets back heavy again. And that's the graph in the middle. And because of this, the muscle has sticking points. And this is due to cross bridge formation in lever arms of the resistance versus the lever arm of the body segment. Now, in the graph on the right, that's an isokinetic torque curve. That's what I like to call the torque signature. And each muscle has a different torque signature. This was discussed last month by John and also in episode 1. So go back and review those because that's very important to how this all works and how the machine can really make a big difference based upon what application you're using. All right, one thing to keep in mind, I said each muscle has its own torque signature. So here we see the ankle everters, and this is an isokinetic test that we did on one of our athletes. So here you can see the graph on the left, and we'll go into testing a little bit more the next couple of months, but the graph on the left there, that's the concentric for the everters, right in blue, left in red. The graph on the right is the eccentric everters. Again, right is blue, left is in red. Now, I drew a line down the middle, right at the neutral, okay? Now, if you take your foot, let's take our left foot. So imagine your left foot is doing the motion, inversion and eversion, okay? We see that when the muscle, or this muscle is not ascending and descending like the quad, okay? So take your foot back and forth through inversion and eversion. When the foot is everted and the fibularis muscles are shortened, it's in the weakest point. And as the foot eccentrically gets moved into inversion, and if we follow that graph on the right, you can see that the muscle actually gets stronger as it gets lengthened. And it lengthens all the way until full inverted position. So you can see that we're almost, or at least with this patient, in both his involved and his uninvolved, you can be twice as strong when the muscle's inverted or lengthened versus everted or shortened. And that makes big implications when we're working isotonically. So let's think about this further. When we typically strengthen ankle everters with elastic resistance, as the patient is everting the ankle out, the resistance is getting heavier as the band stretches. But as I just mentioned, when the ankle's in that everted or shortened position, the muscle belly is actually at its weakest point. So when we're traditionally loading that everter the heaviest when it's in its weakest point, and depending on the length of the band you're using, that resistance can change dramatically. And that doesn't make sense, but it's the easiest and the most traditional way that we strengthen ankles. That's where last month's episode on isokinetic mode comes into play. It's definitely the most ideal way of strengthening the ankle because it has that accommodating resistance. So we're going to show you how technology and CSMI have improved isotonics through dynamometers and the software. So that way isotonics can live up to their full potential of exercise by implementing various biofeedback applications. With isotonic training, there's 3 inputs to the central nervous system. And that means that the patient's responsible for controlling the force output, the direction of movement, and the velocity, as well as the acceleration and deceleration. The applications we use this for with our patients aren't just for strengthening, but they're for neuromuscular control, proprioception, strengthening in both submaximal and maximal output, endurance training, and rate of force production or power training. Now, another major way that isotonic differs from isokinetics is the force velocity curve. And here's the graph for isokinetics. John mentioned that the force increases starting at the lowest with a fast concentric, moving to slow concentric, and then moving to isometric. And then you can get more force production at slow eccentrics into fast eccentrics at the highest torque capacity. But it's important to note that this is only true when velocity is fixed, as with isokinetics. Now with isotonics and functional exercise, the force velocity curve is inverted of this. Now I don't have a picture of the graph, so I went the cheap route and just wrote inverse over the graph. So on the next slide, I'll actually give an example of a squat. I'm going to do 2 reps. The first rep, I'm going to go with the force velocity curve of what we showed with isokinetics first. I'm going to do the eccentric fast and the concentric slowly. In the second rep, I'm going to go with the isotonic curve. I'm going to do a slow eccentric and then the fast concentric. Let me pull up my video. Okay, so again, main screen. All right, so my first rep, I'm going to do that isokinetic curve. I'm going to go really fast eccentrically and a really slow concentric. All right, on rep 2, I'm going to do the isotonic force velocity curve. I'm going to go a really slow eccentric with a fast explosive concentric. All right, so think about this. When I'm isometrically holding that bar, I'm just matching the weight of the bar. As I go eccentrically, there's no way I can produce more weight or more force in the bars producing into me. But when I do concentrics, if I'm going slow concentric, I'm matching the weight of the bar and then just a little bit. But if I go fast and powerful in concentric, I'm not only matching the weight of the bar, but I'm accelerating it up against gravity. So it's the exact inverse. And I like to use that example of how isotonics is different than isokinetics in many different ways. And a big one is, again, that force velocity curve. All right, the last concept I want to cover today is something that we've developed, and maybe others are doing this as well. I like to call it the dynamic isotonics. Okay. Just checking my screen for one moment, making sure everything's going. Okay. All right, in order to better facilitate neuromuscular learning, we can see that the eccentric is heavier. Give me one moment, everybody. I'm being told that my screen is paused. I want to make sure that we are up and running. Go to sharing. PowerPoint. Okay. All right, I believe we're up and running again. All right, so the last concept I want to cover again is the dynamic isotonics. In order to better facilitate neuromuscular learning, you can set the eccentric heavier than the concentric through the software. All right, I like to use what's called, or use a 30% eccentric overload. Now I do this because research has shown us that with corrective training or with proper training, you can be 30% stronger in the eccentric mode than you are in the concentric mode. And again, we're going to cover this in the next couple webinars on testing. So again, we use a 30% eccentric overload. Now with the quad, that's easy, or with the knee, that's easy. You can set the concentric to 10 foot-pounds and the eccentric to 13 foot-pounds. That's 30% more. Now, when the patient's performing this dynamic isotonic exercise, and the motion switches from that heavier eccentric to the lighter concentric mode. This gives a little quick stretch to that musculotendinous unit that stimulates those muscle spindles. It induces the stretch shortening cycle. These effects can start neural adaptations required for plyometrics and return to sports, but you can do it way before it's safe for your patient to actually perform plyometrics. And you're going to see examples of this when we get to the videos. So we'll come back to this concept of the dynamic isotonic training. All right, I have a couple videos I want to show here that demonstrates neuromuscular learning at its most basic level. Now, this first one, this is little Isabel. She's the newest addition to the Bodkin family, and she just started reaching, grabbing with her arms. So what's nice about this is she's actually, let me pause that there. She's using neuromuscular feedback and feed forward mechanisms. So when she reaches out for her toy, if she's successful, and then her brain learns that what it took, that neural pattern to create that successful reach. If she's unsuccessful, like she is most of the time right now, her brain still learns that that attempt, that neuromuscular firing pattern didn't accomplish the goal. And so it helps her to replan or pre-plan for the next movement. And all that is working on wiring her brain for movement. And that's going to be the same thing that we see after injuries and with regaining that neuromuscular control. Now this video here, check your volume on it. It might be a little bit loud. This is American actor Terry Crews. Now he's using EMG to control different devices. I don't know how much of this is real, but I love this video. Okay, I want to believe that every little bit of that video there is real, and he actually controlled each of those aspects with his muscles. All right, let me make sure that we're back sharing my screen again. Okay, we're good to go. All right, let's get into some research. First, we have an older article by Swanick et al., who looked at ACL tears and neuromuscular control. So when the ACL is torn, we lose not only the mechanical stability from that ligament, but it alters the spinal reflex patterns, including the motor nerves and muscle spindles, as well as the conscious and unconscious appreciation of proprioception and kinesthetic awareness. Now, these pathways are required for the feed forward and feedback neuromuscular control systems that I described when I was talking about my little girl Ellie in the video. And those are they're required for that dynamic stabilization that we need. Feed forward is responsible for the preparatory muscle activity, and the feedback regulates the reactive muscle activity. And you need both of those for that dynamic stability. Now, in the same article, the authors promote balance and proprioception and neuromuscular re-education interventions, including proprioceptive, kinesthetic awareness, dynamic stability, preparatory and reactive muscle characteristics, and conscious and unconscious motor patterns. So I have another short video I want to show, and this is me performing a little exercise. And really, it's just, I like to show off. So as this gets loading, And again, I don't expect any of you to have your athletes doing pistol squats, Romanian deadlifts while on a tilt board. Again, I just like to show off, and any chance I can get to do that, I throw that in there. All right. So our next article, we have a systematic review by Cooper, Taylor, and Feller, and they talk about using proprioceptive and balance interventions, which shows overall improvements. And this is nothing new to us. Of course, it shows improvements in balance and proprioception, but the nice thing is it actually shows that you get improvements in overall strength and function as well. Remember, neuromuscular adaptations are what primarily are responsible for your first 6 to 8 weeks of strength training, and as well as the neuromuscular control improves the function. So working these also corresponds with strength and function as well. Now we have another older article by Kim and Kramer. They looked at using visual biofeedback during isokinetic exercise. And again, isokinetic exercise, okay? And they found that especially during the early phases of rehab, the use of visual feedback improved neuromuscular control and motor skill. What's impressive here is that there's a bigger effect during the eccentric mode of contraction, which led them to believe that isokinetic eccentrics, just like what John discussed last month, is the ideal way to strengthen. But especially when you use that visual feedback to teach the patient, and go back to one of John's proactive curls, you got to teach the patient the visual feedback. All right. The mechanisms they suspect on why eccentrics are more sensitive to this are that eccentrics have that altered recruitment patterns in which fast twitch fibers are selectively recruited over the slow twitch fibers. They have a lower motor unit requirement. There's more muscle spindles stimulated during eccentrics because you get tension during elongation compared to concentrics, which tension it occurs, but not during elongation. So it's not going to activate the muscle spindles like you get during eccentrics. Finally, the eccentric cross bridging is more efficient than with concentrics if you take it down to the cellular level. So here I have a little video I want to share on using the visual feedback with eccentric loading, like what John showed last month, and how we can use the visual feedback. Eccentric feedback, here we go. Okay, so let me get this video showing for you here. Okay, so here we have a patient. He's post-op ACL. He's still in the early phases, and we can tell that because I have that adapter pad halfway up. Now we want to make sure we teach him how to use that visual feedback on the screen. So we want to produce that ideal torque signature. Now, if we look on his graph here on the left side, he doesn't have that ascending descending curve. He's initially increasing his torque. Then we can see these wavy lines of that force oscillation John talked about, but it's kind of leveling off and then actually falling off at the end. So what I like to do, and you won't see this on the video, is I go to the screen, I drag my finger along the line I want them to track. I'll even use the mouse pointer in the video so you can watch that. So there, you couldn't see it, but I'm using the finger or my finger to show him how I want to produce. And then I got smart and realized that the audience can't see my finger, so I'm using the mouse pointer. So I'm telling them to continue to push, keep pushing, keep loading into that pad all the way through to the end. And now that they have a good torque line, I want them to try to match that. Now what's impressive is we see carryover and actually improve on this just within one session, but then it carries over to the next session, into the next session. So use the visual feedback, even when we're not talking about isotonics for the neuromuscular control. Use that feedback. Let me go back to my PowerPoint here. Okay, not only during eccentrics did we talk about using that visual feedback, but look back at episode 4 on isometric stability, where we threw the targets up on the screen and we made that patient stay within a very tight target, um, not only to keep them from producing too much force and possibly irritating themselves, but to work on that neuromuscular control. And then go to episode 5, where we talked about using eccentric unloading. And that's the picture on the right. Remember, we had our patient, she on the way up, concentrically, she let the machine lift her up, but then on the way down, she had to keep her foot or her shin in between that adapter pad and the strap. So she was having to match the speed or velocity. So she was having to use neuromuscular control there. So neuromuscular control is a theme throughout the entire plan of care with a dynamometer. Keep that in mind. All right, moving on to our next article, we have Los et al. And I hope I got that name correct. Now, they examine the use of video games as visual feedback, and they suggest that video gameplay can induce neuroplastic reorganization, which leads to long-term retention and transfer of skill. On top of that, they found that gaming leads also to improve motivation and patient engagement. And we see this. Our patients love the isotonic exercise because it's very engaging. There's a lot that they're having to put into it, especially we get into some of the games. Now, it's not Call of Duty or anything. They're very simple games, but the patients have a really good time. And I'm talking across the age spectrum. You know, our high school and middle-aged kids, our older adults, even our seniors, they really enjoy the visual feedback that they get with this, and you can see that the motivation is increased. Since we're on the topic of games, I want to invite John back on here for just a moment. So, John, if you could, let's turn your microphone back on.
Okay, I'm on, but I'm
Okay.
interested to see what you're going to do here.
Okay. So we noticed a few things down at Proactive Physical Therapy. There were a few things that we like to call Johnisms, and we heard them during the day during the clinic, but especially during staff meetings. We kind of turned it into a little bit of a drinking game. So what you can do, go back to listen to your previous episodes, and especially any upcoming ones. And if you have a beverage of choice in your hand, if you hear John say from that standpoint or that perspective, you take a drink. If you also hear him say, this is something we need to pay attention to, that's also one drink. Now, when he goes off on one of his random stories, and he kind of goes around the way, but this is really where John gets his big aha moments when he can make a big point, especially something rehab perspective, but has when the story has nothing to do with it. I mean, that's pretty powerful. So that gets 2 drinks. And John, I have a funny word up on the screen. Could you explain that to me, please?
Sure. The word is humu humu nuku nuku apu a'a, and it's a Hawaiian word that actually stands for the state fish. And what's interesting about it, the state fish itself is actually a very small little fish that swims through the water of Hawaii. So if you're ever in Hawaii, one of the things that they like to do is anytime we have malahinis, newcomers come in, they'll sometimes put up that word and they'll go, can you say humu humu nuku nuku apua'a? And so it's great listening to people try to say that in order to win a drink.
And there you have your 2 drinks there. Now, finally, every once in a while, we'll get John, and he's really on a roll. You'll hear the rarely used but very powerful boom, boom, boom. And if you hear that come out of his mouth, he's serious about a topic. So with that, if you have your beverage in hand, you can go ahead and finish it right there. Oh,
And
go ahead,
because you
John.
brought that up, Daniel, I'm really cautious about saying boom, boom, boom anymore. But if you do have a beer there, which I think you do,
I
since I
do.
just said boom, 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 you should finish it.
I have too much in it for that, but I do need to wet the whistle.
Well, there you go. Well, from this
Mouth is
standpoint,
getting
you
a little
should.
dry. All right, John, let's go ahead and move on, sir. All right, so now, if I can find my place, yes. All right, we're in our last research article here, and this talks about, Make sure I can find my place. All right. So this article here, this talks about using other devices for visual feedback. It measures movement, postural control, force output. There's a lot of different devices, and the ones I have on the screen here, these are actually CSMI devices. I'm not going to go into those, but if you're interested in any of these products, they can be found at the CSMI Solutions. Talk to Rob about them. They're great products, but there's a lot of them out there, right? There's a lot of inertial-based ones, force plate systems, a lot of good things out there that you can use. One of the big ones that's coming up is virtual reality. Now, I had a neighbor when I was in Nashville who was really into virtual reality, and we would load this up, and he got the new Oculus system, which can, we even loaded it up outdoor. So we had a 25 feet, 25 foot by 25 foot area in his yard that you could run around, squat, back and forth. I mean, it was interesting exercise. So I haven't seen it being used in the rehab setting, so I'll be interested to see where it goes with that. Maybe you'll see something by CSMI in a few years using VR. All right, so let's move on to our videos. That was the last of the articles there. So I have a few videos that we're going to go through, and then that'll be the end, leading right up to questions. Let's see. All right, so I'm going to load this first one up here for you. Okay, so this first video here, this is just standard isotonics that you can use on the machine, okay? Now, this is different than isotonics at the gym, all right? The standard isotonic at a gym is a cam-based system, which it knows that, or, a Nautilus and even Cybex, they know that um, we have those sticking points throughout the range of motion, so they built that into their cam system. Whereas if you use just basic standard isotonics, and in the video I had 50 foot-pounds loaded up, you're not going to get that improvement or that easing up of tension through those sticking points. It's going to be 50 foot-pounds the entire way through. And as you can see, the visual feedback of standard, just straight up isotonics is not very telling. It's 50 foot-pounds on either end, so not very exciting there. But let's move on to some of the other ones. Now, this is one of our pacing applications. This teaches just speed of movement. This first one is called pacing bar, and the computer, you set that glowing bar up and down. Here I have it set for a 2-second concentric with a 1-second hold and a 4-second eccentric. The patient controls that line across the screen. When they're in the target, it's blue. When they're outside, it's red. And it gives you a percentage of score for both concentric and eccentric. Now you can make that bar bigger or smaller based on the level of difficulty. This next one here is called roadway. So with this, the y-axis represents the percentage of range of motion that they're in, and the x-axis is time. Across the top of the screen, it keeps a score of the patient based on how well they stayed within the roadway. They either get a green or a red dot, depending on their percentage. On the left of the screen, they're graded a percentage of time they stay in the roadway in both concentric and eccentric modes. Now here, the patient's going to control the dot. And as they lower and raise the limb, their task is to stay within that target roadway. Again, I have it set for 2-second pause, 2-second concentric, 2-second hold, and a 4-second eccentric. And again, there's their dot, and the number across the dot, that's just the percentage of the range of motion that they're currently in. Now keep in mind, you don't need to load up tension or torque during these. You can do this early in the rehab phase um, without any external load. So they're just working on position controlling, working on speed controlling, but this also teaches them later on the pacing of gym exercise, that 2-second lift in the raise and the 4-second lowering. So this is really good to use early on as well. She's about, I believe, 6 weeks out at the time of this video. So these next 2 reps here, I have her purposely trying to do bad because I wanted you to see what it looks like across the top left side of the screen if she can get a red dot. And on the next rep, she actually does. You have to be outside of it for 50% of the time to get a red dot. And she got it there. All right, this next one is called the proprioception training. You can even use this as a test. Now in the dashboard, here we go. We're going to go up to the dashboard. We're going to click on the mode button. Now, once you're in the mode, select isometric on the left. And then from that, you just set the angle you want to test first. And I set 60 degrees. Now check the box here. Computer moves patient to the angle. You got to check that box. Once you have that, click OK. Then you're just going to set your anatomic 0 and range of motion like you would with any exercise or test on the machine. So I'm going to set that there. Now under the start button, you see a button for proprioception. Now once this is open, you can click the top left button for demonstrate. When you click that, the machine is going to move the patient to that angle you designated. Here at 60 degrees. So let's click it. Machine moves her to 60 degrees. You want them to feel that angle. They have to, that's what they're trying to match. So once you click on test patient, it's going to clear it and the machine unlocks. The next, you're going to have the patient try to match that angle. So let's have her go to where she thinks that angle is. Once she's there, we're going to click the button test patient. So we click that, and it's going to tell us how close to it she was. And you can see here she was at 63, so 3 degrees off. And you can do this 3 different times. I like to do this from the bottom of the motion as well as the top of the motion. I also sometimes ask them to close their eyes because that brings a different element into it as well. Now, if you're satisfied with how they did at this angle, you can click OK and move to another angle. But if you want to retest that position because they had a difficult time, you can click clear and then demonstrate again and retest. But we're going to clear it out. Now, once you clear it out, it takes you back to the dashboard. And click OK. Now, all you have to do is stay in the dashboard. You can just highlight right here, angle, and you can change the angle. Here, I'm going to set it to 45 degrees. You can put any angle you like here. I typically stick with, 15-degree increments, 45, 30, 60, 15. So here I'm bringing it to the top of the motion and I'm having it teach her the demonstrate it from the top down. So I'm just asking her, are you ready? You think you know the position? So let's bring it to the bottom. All right, she tries to match the position. I told her to close her eyes, that way she can't look and cheat. And I'm just clicking test patient. Here she goes again. And so again, we're just reading 3 different values here. And again, there's no load on the dynamometer. It's just the weight of the limb, plus they're having to lift the weight of the adapter. And you can see that by that adapter being higher up on her shin, she's early on in the ACL rehab process. The next training for proprioception is called response time. The y-axis is the percentage of the range of motion, and here the patient controls the ball, and they're given a circle on the screen as a target. The patient is trying to move the ball into the target and lock in as quickly as possible. The patient scored on the left-hand side of the screen for how quickly they can settle in place and how quickly they can get it there. And that's on the left side of the screen. So we're going to see our athlete working through these different angles. She was a college basketball player. She came to us over the summer. She was about 8 weeks in from ACL reconstruction using her hamstring as the graft. So she's working through the different ranges of motion. The next two applications are interactive path and interactive line. So in the first one, which is interactive path, the patient controls the dot and they're charged with keeping the dot inside the blue path. So this is working positional control, and this is where I like to bring the eccentric overload in. Remember, you can set that concentric load different from the eccentric load. Now for a knee, a good place to start is 10 and 13 foot-pounds, but for an arm or a shoulder, you have to go lighter, about 1 to 2 foot-pounds, which I know is not 30%, but then as they get stronger, you can change it to where you actually get a true 30% overload. Now watch Chris's arm as he does this exercise. You're going to see a small bouncing up and down, and that's similar to that quick plyometric effect. 30% is ideal again. Nice thing about this too is you can adjust the resistance through the exercise. It's very fatiguing, not just the muscle, but that neuromuscular system is challenged so much that they fatigue out really fast with this. So you can make it lighter as you go. Our next application is interactive line. In this one, the patient controls two dots on the left of the screen. Their task is to keep that line passing between the two dots. And you can change the difficulty level by how closely those dots are to each other. You can also adjust the speed. And again, you can make it more difficult by adjusting the torque. Now for this and for interactive line, even though I'm saying how this is where I like to bring in that dynamic isotonic, you can again set this to no load. You can set it to 0 foot-pounds for both motions. If you want to make it a true isotonic, you can set it to 3 pounds each way. But again, I like to use that dynamic isotonic because I really have seen the neuromuscular system respond very quickly when you use that. And you can see Bradley here working through the exercise, controlling that position with his quadriceps here. Now keep in mind that when we do isotonics, you're only working one muscle group. It's not like isokinetic mode where you're working the quad one direction and the hamstring the other. One muscle is controlling it the whole way through. Now we move on to our games, and here we have Pong. So the patient's going to control the paddle on the left, and the computer controls the paddle on the right. For here, I usually like to set the acceleration of the exercise to a value of 1. So that way with each deflection, the ball speeds up a little bit. Now you don't have to do that, but I like to. You can also change the difficulty by how well the computer responds or how the size of the paddle. One thing you can't adjust here during the exercise is the torque or the resistance. So you have to set that up during your in the dashboard. Last one we have here is called breakout. Our patient here is going to control the paddle across the bottom of the screen. And their job is to make sure that the paddle or the goalie, like I like to say, is going to deflect the ball up. And as they deflect up, it's going to break bricks. Now our patient here was coming to see us for some Achilles tendinopathy. and he's performing this with the plantar flexors. Now, he also had some issues with balance, which is why I brought this in for this patient here. We're also working on balance proprioception control. And again, we can have these games set for a no load and use them early in the process, or we can have them be set for a constant load or that dynamic isotonic load. So as I mentioned before, you can use this throughout the whole rehab plan of care. So lastly, we come to power training. Here we're focusing on rate of force production. And we're going to cover this in next month's webinar on isometric and isokinetic testing. The last few years, we found that that's a very powerful metric in return to play decision making. So this application on the machine is perfect for that. So our athlete here, he is exploding up as hard and as fast as he can, and then he's going to lower it down slowly. The key with power training is keeping the resistance light. Again, if you're using the dynamic isotonics, I start with 10 and 13 foot-pounds, and then I move to 20, 26, 30 and 39 foot-pounds for that eccentric overload, 40 and 52. I've never taken anybody over 40 and 52 foot-pounds, just because it's better to go light and work on that rate of force production and speed. It's not about how heavy you can make it here. Okay, lastly, I have one quick video I want to show, if I can find it, on how to get to, let's see if it's in here, the biofeedback. I'm not seeing that here. Feedback. All right, so this last video I was going to show you was how you can navigate the menus to get to that. So what I'll do is, if I can just speed through here. All right, so this is our dashboard. What you can do is when you get to the dashboard is you can click on the mode button, and once you're in mode button, that will take you to the section where you can click on Isotonic. And over here on the mode, you select Isotonic, the muscle action, and then when you select the Isotonic, it will change it. Again, that's isometric. You would select Isotonic, the muscle action, then you can set the torque. After you would set that here, again, don't do what I'm doing in this video. I can always try to throw this up to Rob and he could add it to the Isokinetics 101 website. Down here in the feedback section, if you expand this, it will pull it up. Oh, it's still not showing. Okay, so we'll just move on. What I'll do is I'll throw that to Rob, and what he can do is he can load that up on the website to where you can access it. It's a short video. Basically, in your dashboard, go to the mode button, select Isotonics. After you have the resistance and action set, you can drop down to feedback. At the bottom there, you have access to all the games, as well as the different interactive path, the Pong, the response time, as well as power training. It's all in there. It's very user friendly. So that's it. Let me get John back on because I want to throw a couple questions out there.
Well, thank you, Daniel. I think that was a interesting conversation because isotonics, quite honestly, is probably one of the hardest areas for most people to really understand and especially implement with machines. We see a lot of people get into some gentle passive motion for mobility. We see them get into isometrics for stabilization. And of course, they want to use isokinetics because of the strengthening modes. But what they fail to do often is really understand isotonics well. You've given us the perfect setup for us to be able to go into isotonics and learn about that neuromuscular development that's so important to us.
I
You
like
know,
to think of it like this: if isokinetics is the cake, the isotonic mode and what you can do with it, that's your frosting, that's your sprinkles, those are your candles. Now, you can have a cake without frosting and sprinkles and candles, but it's just better with frosting.
everybody likes the frosting the best. What are you talking about? I would say isokinetics is the frosting because it's
That's
because
good.
of what I like. But isotonics, what you're saying is just so true because, if you're a Yonda fan like I am, he talks about sensory motor response. It's not just musculoskeletal, it's not just neuro. We have to put it all together. We have that sensory motor response, the afferent efferent input. And by paying attention to the virtual reality, by looking at the games, and one of the things everybody could see pretty easily is that's one of the reasons we wanted larger monitors mounted on the wall, so that the patients can actually look at that in different positions that they are in, to be able to activate the system a little bit more appropriately. So, this is a perfect introduction to isotonics and some of the things that we need to do in the future.
Speaking of the future, let's go to the past real quick, John. I had a patient write into us about, let's say you have a, a, a protocol, physician protocol, and it obviously doesn't include a HUMAC norm generated with it. When do you know when to use isometric, passive, isokinetic, eccentric, isotonic, if you don't have that protocol? And let's just use the example of subacromial impingement versus rotator cuff repair versus Bankart.
Okay, you want me to take that first?
Yeah, take that
Um,
first.
let me just go through some generalities. I mean, obviously, one of the things that we're all looking for is early rotator cuff repair. We want mobility. We don't want to load the repair. So, one of the things that the docs will often say very early on is you never want to load it more than 5 pounds. Well, we both know that if you put somebody with a weight, a 3-pound weight, and they lift their arm up, but if they have impingement, if they have irritation, they drop their arm, what's really going to happen is they're going to load more than 5 pounds. I mean, the deceleration is going to be fairly significant. So by being able to actually control the range of motion from a general mobility standpoint, to be able to increase um, early phases of range is extremely important. The beautiful part about that is that we can again use the isometric to set up a sub-maximal like threshold. So if we're only looking for 1 or 2 pounds, and it might be that we want to start in a position that they're the strongest in, and stay away from that weakened position. So I like some of the things that you were talking about early on with the ankle, of what positions are actually the strongest and which ones are the weakest. So we know with the quadriceps, we have an ascending, descending curve. We're the strongest in mid-range, but not every muscle is like that. Some are ascending, some are descending curves. So we have to kind of recognize that we have those aspects and we need to be able to train them. I want to train my hamstrings early on in the strongest position isometrically, and then take them into the weakest positions that they're going to get into.
And
Um,
one of the things you always mentioned or brought it back to was the phase of healing.
Phase of healing has become extremely important. So when we really look at, say, a rotator cuff, if we look at any type of collagen repair across the board, whether we're going with an Achilles repair, infrapatellar tendon repair, a rotator cuff repair, we know that there's a time frame that we have to allow for just the basic biologic healing of that graft to occur. And then we could start to stimulate, and by actually stimulating it in the right environment, we can actually increase the healing potentiality of the tissue itself. So if we want the tissue to heal a little bit better, we want to give it a little bit of stress, just not too much stress. How do we control stress? We control the range of motion, we control the velocity, so their acceleration, deceleration, and we control the end range. The beautiful part about utilizing the machine is that we take the control away from the patient in the early aspect, and then we gradually increase the amount of control back to them. So what you're showing us at the very end here with force rate production is really what we want our athletes working on as part of an entire program, not just one aspect, but they have to develop that quickness of motion. And that's one of the reasons that we do drop jumps, we do, box jumps, we do all of the different plyometric setups as we can in order to learn from that. The most important part of it, I would say, is for us to be able to train them how to do a drop jump before they actually do it, so that we know that the muscles are actually able to perform a higher speed eccentric loading program before we actually put them at 2 times their body weight.
Fantastic. I think that almost sets up a boom, boom, boom point.
We could say boom, boom, boom.
All right, everybody, that's it for episode 6 of Isotonic Control. Join us next month when we get into, we move on to the testing aspects. I will discuss isometric testing, followed the month after by John, where he's going to go very deep into isokinetic testing and the interrupted stroke isokinetic test, where we're going to examine eccentric loading of the muscle as well as the concentric.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. What we want to talk about during the isokinetic testing aspect is how to test both concentrically and eccentrically. Most people have gotten into the concentric mode of testing, but we know most injuries occur in the eccentric mode of contraction, so we have to be able to test and train in that mode in order to be effective. Hey, a little shout out again to all of our international watch participants. Thank you very much for tuning in. We know it's different times everywhere in the world. A lot of guys turning in early in the morning, some very late at night. But if there's things that we can do to help you, we want to be able to answer your questions specifically. So for my friends in Hong Kong, give us an email, send us the information, and let us set up some of those question and answer periods for you guys.
All right. So John, let's knock out our webcams because I need to make sure I get to the references
No, not a
screen
problem.
today. Let me click all the way through to my references. That way, if anybody wanted to look at those again, I have them all on the individual screens, but here they are. So you can always pause the video and look at them there. These are our image references here. And thank you all again. We will see you next month.
Take care, guys.